Well, we're in the middle of our much talked about international election season. Our badly misnamed Government of National Unity is in place, showing good signs at the moment of disunity. France going for its second round, and Britain has just completed what has also been misnamed by most of the media as a Labour landslide. It was anything but. We'll deal with that later. The media persists here, too, in referring to the Government of National Unity. I think bringing up images and echoes, I think, is what the ANC wants, of 1994, of how we had coming together, a toenadering, as the Afrikaners say, of all sides in order to dismantle apartheid. We had a common idea, common identity. It's anything but at the moment. So we look at it. Take a good example. For example, Gauteng, the most populous and wealthiest province in the country. I mean, this is the most incredible disunity we've seen. And then we've had attacks, for example, on the appointed National Minister of Basic Education, who happens to come from the Democratic Alliance, Siviwe Mkwarube, who has been named a class enemy by the teachers' union and been opposed when all she's asked for really is she wants to set up a consultative forum of everyone, including the unions, teachers, etc., to review our entire education system, starting, very importantly, from the bottom up, from early childhood development. That's what she's asking for. How can this be anything bad, anything wrong? But anyhow, let's get back to the differences between all these three poles in Britain, France, and South Africa. In the first place, all of them have reflected one thing: low turnouts, which I would argue, particularly in South Africa, where you're a classic example, shows the level of disgruntlement, of even anger, what we have called here the Gatfall factor. And it's also reflected in all these places in the fact that traditional parties have been turned against by voters. Traditional voters have deserted their former parties. It's an important development. You see, the ANC lost its 50+% position and majority in Parliament, not because the traditional opposition, the DA, scored any more. They didn't. It's because voters who traditionally had voted for the ANC deserted, largely to the Umkhonto we Sizwe party, but also to other smaller parties as well. The DA itself, which really reflects the old, what are called here white liberals, didn't really improve much at all. In fact, they held on to their basic position, which, as the commentator Moletsi Mbeki has noted, still comprises 58% of their voters, a very integrated party, more integrated, admittedly, than any others, but 58% are still part of the traditional white electorate. And that is not one that is growing at all. Now, the same applies in Britain, where there was no Labour landslide. We're talking about overall, Labour's vote probably improved by about 2%. Now, they have a problem there because of their constituency system and the first part past the post, etc. I won't go into that now. But the Conservative government was not defeated by a landslide by Labour. It was undermined, just as the ANC was undermined by the Umkhonto we Sizwe party, by reform. And people who turned against traditional Tory or Conservative voters who turned against the traditional party. And they deflected and they were undermined by, as here, parties that are basically xenophobic and ultra-nationalist. And now that is very worrying, and it is something we should be very conscious of. Again, as I say, particularly in South Africa. The devil, as always, is in the detail. And it's important to understand, for anyone interested in the future, not just of South Africa, but globally, we have to look and see what the future is for our, I would refer to as partial democracies. I have referred to them actually as hypocrisies, and I think that also applies in planning the way forward. Now, we will need a degree of unity, particularly in fields such as education, and we can hope for it here. Will we get it? We'll have to see. It's very doubtful, particularly when you look at the degree of difference, of disunity. Go to the British example. We have the new Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer. Standing against him in his incredibly safe Labour constituency of Holborn was Andrew Feinstein, who was an MP in our own parliament here and the chair of the Finance Oversight Committee, who outed the corruption on the arms deal, if people will remember, and 23 years ago decamped after being muscled out of the ANC to Britain. He actually came second. He undermined the new Prime Minister's vote by nearly 50%, scoring 8,000 votes. And then just down the road from there was the former leader of the Labour Party, the left-wing leader, the anti-apartheid activist, the Palestine, Gaza activist, Jeremy Corbyn. Jeremy Corbyn won against the Labour Party, his own party as it was. He'd been suspended and then expelled. He won with a majority of 7,000. And then further north in Britain, there were three other candidates who stood basically on local issues of housing, poverty, etc. But also what distinguished them, as distinguished Feinstein and Corbyn, was a position on Gaza, on support for the Palestinians. And they've won. So they now have four, shall we say, distinctly Gazan MPs in the House. Now, this applies, we should think about that in South Africa, because we are well known, as everyone should know, for taking the case of genocide to the International Court. But we now have in our Government of National Unity people who are ministers who are totally and utterly opposed to the Palestinian issue and to Gaza, who are totally in support of the Netanyahu government, one of which being Gayton McKenzie of the Patriotic Alliance. And they claim authority, not from a party, not from an individual, but from on high, from God himself. They say God has told them, according to Kenny Kunene, the chairman and president of the Patriotic Alliance, that they have to support Israel and therefore Netanyahu. There are others who take a similar position. Well, that's on the foreign policy issue. Maybe that can be dodged. It can be dodged for a while, perhaps, but forever, I can't see that happening. And when we have groups, the South African Communist Party and the unions, COSATU, referring to the DA as the class enemy. Yes, admittedly, they're the capitalist party. It's nothing more than that. But the point is, we're in a mess at the moment. Do we want to get out by having a government of national unity? Well, we haven't got one. But at least we need a degree of unity if we're going to achieve anything. And I think that is the lesson we have to learn. As I said, the devil is in the detail. We need to study that detail, not just here, but in other elections as well, to learn what might be a better way forward for all of us. Well, we can just hope, I suppose, live in hope.